Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Sword Art Online Alicization review. This one's going to be for episode 13, which is called Ruler and Mediator. So this was very clearly a second part to episode 12. I think more so than it just being the episode afterwards. It definitely felt like, in between episode 12 and 13 probably wasn't the best time for us to actually go on a week break. This explanation, I think, really needs to be kind of seen 12 immediately going into 13 because it is one continuous story. But the section we got here was basically, where does Cardinal come into this whole thing with Quinella and her gaining control to become the administrator? And I love how they immediately jump in, which is explaining that as much as she gained basically all the power that the world had to offer, she still was up against these limits of the fact that by extending her life in this way, she still only had a set amount of basically memory, even in a brain. And I think the books go into a little bit more detail on this, but just the idea that for the most part, like, humans sort of like die naturally, their bodies die before their kind of soul actually like fills up. So like if someone's body could actually live longer, their soul kind of wouldn't be any sort of a limit to it. And that's why they haven't addressed this point yet, but the idea is that Kirito going through time accelerated stuff in the underworld is actually like aging his soul, but your soul can live much longer than your body, so it's not really a kind of negative thing as such. But they're just making it clear that Quinella, having lived so long here, was pushing up against those limits, and so decided to do this thing where she got this girl and basically copied herself into this girl, I suppose, to sort of clear up space. And it sort of worked for Quinella to, I suppose, extend her life, but caused the problem of basically she just created someone with the same level of system authority as her, and that person can act. And because Quinella was obviously kind of corrupted, the other part of the Cardinal program came in, and Cardinal tried to correct Quinella's errors, and that's what created this fight. And we got a hint, like a couple of scenes of some really nice action and animation of this huge fight between, like, I suppose basically gods of this world, using crazy system call commands and so on. Animation was really cool in this kind of chase sequence, a bit of a hand-to-hand combat with the rod versus the sword. But it's basically to set up the fact that Cardinal escaped this situation where she was the sort of more less experienced kind of character in this, and had to force herself into the library, which is one of the few places in the world where Quinella doesn't actually have any effect, despite how powerful that she actually is. But she is sort of forever locked now to this place. So that's the setup here, and then it obviously creates the reason for why Quinella now has opposition here in Cardinal, wanting to correct her errors. And from there we basically go into like the explanation of kind of what Cardinal feels about everything that's going on, that she's aware of Wrath kind of running this experiment and believes that them, as the gods of this world, don't have any kind of good intentions for it. And so rather than just letting the people of this world die in this horrible war that's about to happen, she thinks that if they manage to defeat Quinella, her plan will be to just erase the world. That way no one has to suffer. It's just this world which has this horrible fate just goes out of existence. But she offers Kirito the opportunity to be able to potentially save some of the people from Underworld, as they very quickly go through it. But they basically give you the explanation here for kind of, okay, how does this work? Without going into the full details, how are new people in the Underworld actually created? And they give you a rough visual of the overall light cube and how it consists of this cluster of these kind of cubes. And basically she was planning to destroy all of them, but what she's going to do is actually archive. I think she basically says Kirito can have 10 people to archive, and potentially technology in the real world might advance to the point where you can basically have AIs actually have bodies. And that's where the stuff from a few episodes ago with like Asuna and the robot come into play, in that is part of what's going on here, is that to try and give bodies as well to these Fluctlights, because they've solved the like intelligence part, they just haven't solved the body part, I suppose, for most of these people. So they're obviously suggesting the fact that Yu-Gi-Oh is going to be one of the people that Kirito wants. So we flash through characters like Selka, Alice is brought up at this point in time, and so on. Here are the characters who Kirito would want to save, the key people from across his journey, because, like I've been saying in these videos, he treats this world as being just as valid as the real world. So Yu-Gi-Oh is his best friend, and especially after breaking the seal in his right eye, realizes that he is just as, capable, just as free of a person as he is. He just happens to be artificial, whereas Kirito's a real human. So, very interesting thing, and it puts kind of Kirito in this unique position of, like, he doesn't agree with Cardinal necessarily about the idea of just, like, ending the world like that. He wants to have more hope, but Cardinal, given what she's been through, kind of feels like that's the only way, and she feels that Kirito will eventually, I suppose, come to feel the same way that she does, and I suppose realize what true despair actually is. So the plan is basically set into motion, that they have to get up to Quinella and defeat her to allow Cardinal to do this, and then along the way they're going to try and free the Integrity Knights, mainly Alice, because we get explained to us that, okay, the piety module thing that we saw with Eldry a couple of episodes ago, that is the thing that basically blocks someone's memories and does all this kind of other stuff to make them an Integrity Knight, but that has to take the place of something. And what that is that person's most kind of valuable memory, the thing that they kind of care about the most. So that memory is taken out, the piety module was put in, and that's why they sort of forget a key aspect of who they are and why they have this whole different sort of persona to them. So we get explained that another reason to get up to the top of the tower, in addition to facing Quinella, is that they have to get the stolen memory fragments back from all of the Integrity Knights. The only way to restore Alice is going to be to basically, realistically defeat her in combat, try and do potentially the piety module thing, and then get the memory fragment back to, restore her to who she actually is. And Cardinal gives them these two knives that will link her library to wherever they stab, and that will allow Cardinal to actually come in and affect what's going on there. It's basically, a teleportation type system to get an Integrity Knight back to Cardinal so she can do what she needs to do to attempt to reverse the Integrity Knight process. So that's what this episode basically acts as. It is the setup for the next stage of the plot. Yu-Gi-Oh and Kirito are going to first get their swords back, and then basically head up the tower, fighting Integrity Knights as they go along, in an effort to get to Quinella and face her. There's still, as they bring up in this episode, the lingering threat of the dark territory in the background, which there have been vague at times about, and we haven't really touched exactly on what it is, other than the fact that Quinella doesn't have any authority over it. So it's this wild place, kind of like the library, where she, as the administrator, has no authority over. So that is, Cardinal talks about this sort of end game of wrath, and something that the world is kind of gradually moving towards, that will cause even more chaos than is already happening. So they're basically setting up that, the dark territory is something going to happen there, and this incoming war between basically the Integrity Knights and the dark territory. How is that going to go? Because it's effectively, 31 Integrity Knights versus Quinella, and 31 Integrity Knights versus the entire Dark Territory, because of the way she made her section of the world work with regards to, like, hiding how to get stronger from people. And so, yes, the Integrity Knights are the absolute most powerful, like, beings, because they are just, like, they're the equivalent of, like, over-leveled kind of characters in the game, compared to, like, normally leveled characters from the Dark Territory, but there's so few of them. How is that going to work? So there's a lot of stuff that this episode presents with regards to, like they're clearly setting up something bigger that's going to happen, but at the same time there could be this end state once they defeat Quinella, but there could also be something going on with the Dark Territory. So There's definitely a lot of depth here, and one of the final things they mentioned in the episode is that, okay, you'll need your equipment good enough to defeat Integrity Knights. You have powerful swords, but you need to basically know how to use the same techniques that are going to be used against you, and that is the perfect weapon control, the enhanced armament, stuff like that. And she explains to them that it is an ability of divine weapons which are made from a specific divine object in the world, that you can sort of unleash that object's past or its memories to make it gain aspects and thus special powers from it. So visually, the way they showed that was Kirito's sword is made from the Gigas tree, so his sword is going to have powers that relate to it being a giant tree, having it being a super tough material even compared to metal and stuff like that. Yuji's Blue Rose sword, they kind of showed that what it was basically made from was this kind of blue rose that was growing in ice, so that's why it has a kind of ice aspect to it as well. And they showed kind of icy vines coming out of it, so giving you a hint as to what his sword's ability is. We already know it can sort of grow, but that seems to just be a basic enhancement that Kirito can do. But Yu-Gi-Oh's one, they seem to be suggesting vines, and she gives them the whole system call, generate this, that, and the other to accomplish this. But there's obviously a suggestion that they'll probably have to work on this to get it to that level. But still, really cool for the setup for, I suppose, our first. I suppose it's our second Integrity Knight fight, but I suppose our first proper one, assuming they get their swords back as soon as possible. So, as I said, good episode. As I said, not necessarily the best episode to have the break in between. These two probably everything should have been done to try and make them as back-to-back as possible. Not to mention just the idea that 13 episodes is a quarter of the run of Alicization, so it's the end of the first core, I suppose. I think we're getting a new opening and ending, I think, next time out. So it would have been better to have a break probably after this episode rather than before this, but it's when it happened, Christmas, New Year's, it made sense. I don't have too much to say about this. It was mainly them giving us an explanation, and so the review primarily is kind of just recapping the explanation and covering, I suppose, what it necessarily means going forward. But our characters have their kind of marching orders. They have support now from someone very powerful, and now it's going to be all down to the fighting, and that's really exciting because we haven't in the grand scheme of this show so far, we haven't seen a ton of fighting. There was a little fight against the goblins in the first episode. There was a couple of sparring matches with regards to the sword stuff, but for the most part they kept that to two characters using one special move against each other, not a lot of animation going on, and then a couple of really well animated scenes. So I assume they're saving a lot of the big stuff for big fights that are to come and potentially the next few episodes and beyond. So that's been my review for episode 13 of Sword Art Online Alicization. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on the episode, but that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.